It was January 7th in the year 1789 that the first U.S. presidential election was held. Congress sets January 7th in 1789 as the date by which states are required to choose electors for the country's first ever presidential election. A month later, on February 4th, George Washington was elected president by state electors and sworn into office on April 30th in 1789. It was January 7th in the year 1891 that Zora Neale Hurston, novelist and folklorist, is born in Nautasoga, Alabama. Although at the time of her continuance of eternity in 1960, Hurston had published more books than any other black woman in America, she was unable to capture a mainstream audience in her lifetime, and she continued her eternity poor and alone in a welfare hotel. Today, she is seen as one of the most important black writers in American history. Eatonville, Florida was an all-black town when Hurston was born. The daughter of a Baptist preacher, Hurston had little contact with white people until her mother's continuance of eternity in 1904, when Hurston was 13 years old. Until her teens, Hurston was largely sheltered from racism. A talented, energetic young woman with a powerful desire to learn, she didn't finish high school, but prepared herself for college and excelled at Howard University. In 1925, she moved to New York, where she became a central figure in the Harlem Renaissance. High-spirited, outgoing, and witty, she became famous for her storytelling talents. She studied anthropology with a prominent professor at Barnard and received a fellowship to collect oral histories and folklore in her home state. She also studied voodoo in Haiti. In 1931, she collaborated with Langston Hughes on the play Mulebone. Her first novel, Jonah's Gourd Vine, featuring a central character based on her father, was published in 1934. Mules and Men, a collection of material from her research in oral folklore, was published in 1935 and became her best-selling work during her lifetime, but even so, it earned her only $943.75. In 1937, she published Their Eyes Were Watching God, the story of a black woman looking for love and happiness in the South. The book was criticized at the time, especially by black male writers who condemned Hurston for not taking a political stand and demonstrating the ill effects of racism. Instead, the novel, now considered her masterwork, celebrated the rich tradition of the rural black South. Hurston's work remained uplifting and joyful despite her financial struggles. Zora published a memoir, Dust Tracks on a Road, in 1942. She worked on and off as a maid, leading up to her continuance of eternity in 1960. In the 1970s, her work, almost forgotten, was revived by feminist and black studies scholars, and an anthology, I Love Myself When I Am Laughing, and Then Again When I Am Looking Mean and Impressive, was published in 1979. It was January 7th in the year 1950 that Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is the #1 song on the U.S. pop charts. You know Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen because of the 1823 poem, A Visit from St. Nicholas, aka 'Twas the Night Before Christmas. But your knowledge of Rudolph, the most famous reindeer of all, comes courtesy of a department store copywriter named Robert L. May. May's songwriter brother-in-law who set his words to music, and the singing cowboy who made a household name of May's creation. The story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer begins in 1939 at Montgomery Ward, the Chicago-based retail and catalog giant. Seeking a cheaper holiday giveaway than the children's coloring books they had purchased and distributed in years past, Montgomery Ward asked its own marketing department to create a new and original Christmas storybook from scratch. The task fell to May, a family man with a 4-year-old daughter. The story that May wrote was given away to more than 2 million Montgomery Ward customers in 1939. It was not until May's brother-in-law adapted the story into a song almost 10 years later, however, that Rudolph truly entered the national consciousness. May's brother-in-law was a professional songwriter named Johnny Marks, best known for works like Rockin' Around the Christmas Tree in 1958 and A Holly Jolly Christmas in 1962, in addition to Rudolph. In 1949, Marks' songs found its way to radio legend Gene Autry, the original singing cowboy, whose recording of Rudolph sold more than 2 million units in its first year alone, on its way to becoming the second most successful Christmas record in history after White Christmas. It was at this point in the story of Rudolph when those with a nose for legal issues began to wonder who owned the rights to the beloved Christmas story and money-making juggernaut. In fact, as a paid employee of Montgomery Ward, author Robert L. May had no legal claim whatsoever to an ownership stake in Rudolph. Furthermore, May was a widowed single father by 1947, facing enormous debts as a result of his wife's terminal illness. Yet in a twist that will boggle the minds and warm the hearts of those hardened to the ways of modern American capitalism, the president of Montgomery Ward, one Sewell Avery, signed over to Mr. Robert L. May 100% of the Rudolph copyright in January of 1947. Awesome. May lived comfortably on the royalties from Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer until his continuance of paternity in 1976. It was January 7th in the year 1953 that President Harry S. Truman, our nation's 33rd president, announces the U.S. has developed a hydrogen bomb. It was just 3 years earlier, on January 31st in 1950, that Truman publicly announced that he directed the Atomic Energy Commission to proceed with the development of the hydrogen bomb. President Truman's directive came in response to evidence of an atomic explosion occurring within the USSR in 1949. It was January 7th in 1955 that the curtain at the Metropolitan Opera in New York rises to reveal Marion Anderson, the first African American to perform with the Met. By then, Anderson was in the twilight of her career that was equal parts acclaimed and hamstrung by racism. First noticed by an aunt who convinced her to join a church choir and helped her put on her first professional shows, Anderson spent her early career in the eastern United States. She was successful, but consistently thwarted from mainstream stardom by racism and segregation, and she eventually decided to continue her career in Europe. She became a sensation there, particularly in Scandinavia, and major figures such as composer Jean Sibelius and conductor Arturo Toscanini praised her as a singular vocal talent. Upon returning to the U.S., Anderson performed regularly, but continued to be denied bookings, hotel rooms, and other basic opportunities that were afforded to whites. In 1939, the Daughters of the American Revolution refused to let her perform at Constitution Hall on account of her race. A group of supporters that included our nation's 32nd president, Franklin D. Roosevelt, and his wife Eleanor, who resigned from the DAR in protest, helped her instead put on a concert at the Lincoln Memorial. Attended by 75,000 people, including prominent members of Roosevelt's cabinet, and broadcast across the nation, the concert not only bolstered her fame, but also thrust Anderson into the nascent struggle for civil rights. Rudolph Bean became director of the Met in 1950 and was intent on signing Anderson to perform there from the outset. Though she had been courted by companies, foreign and domestic, Anderson had shied away from opera in the past, feeling her voice was not right for it and deterred by the lack of roles for black singers. When Bing finally convinced her to sign with him, he did not tell the board of the Met until after the fact. He cast Anderson as Ulrica in Verdi's Un ballo in maschera. The role, with a witch-like figure often portrayed by white women wearing dark makeup, was not the lead, and it was freighted with racial stereotypes connecting primitive and backwards traditions with people of color. Nonetheless, her debut at the Met was a major moment in the history of integration of the arts, And the New York Times reported that Anderson's performance left many audience members in tears. The Met made Anderson a permanent member, although Un Ballo en Mascara was her only appearance with the company. She would go on to perform at the inaugurations of President Dwight D. Eisenhower, our nation's 34th president, and John F. Kennedy, our nation's 35th president. In 1965, she retired following a farewell tour that began at Constitution Hall, where she had once been barred from performing, and ended at Carnegie Hall. She continued her eternity in 1993. It was January 7th in the year 2015 that 12 people continued their eternity in a shooting at the Charlie Hebdo offices. Today, we remember those who continue their eternity on this day. The historic information divulged on this audio file can be verified on History.com.